Missing person cases are the hardest to deal with, not just for the people involved, but everyone in general, because there's just no explanation, no ending, and no closure. As human beings, we're wired to want to know the complete picture. We want the story to come to an end. Fans of Firefly will know exactly what I mean. We want that full circle moment when everything comes together, but it's not possible every single time. Today's case is just that. 17-year-old Paige Johnson was a single mother, a loving daughter, and an amazing friend. She was also a teenager who just wanted to have fun. This was why she went to a party on the fateful day of September 22nd, 2010. Now, Paige had been to parties with friends in the past, but this time, she would not return home, not even after a few hours or days, or eventually months, and even years. She was just gone. It took the police more than 10 years to find Paige, and 3 more to convict the person most likely behind her disappearance. Because even though everyone knew who was at fault, there was one missing puzzle piece that no one could find, even after 13 years had passed. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in that kind of thing and you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing, and it just keeps you up to date with all of my latest videos. Paige Johnson was born on August 29th of 1993 to parents Gary and Donna Johnson in Cincinnati, on the southern banks of the Ohio River. Paige was the middle child. She had an older sister named Brittany and a younger brother named Garrett. Even though Paige was a very happy and lovable kid, there was a long history of substance abuse in her family, and this often left the family strapped for funds. Paige's mom, Donna, worked long shifts to make ends meet since they weren't the most stable financially, whereas sadly her dad, Gary, gave in to the temptation of illegal substances. Even though initially Gary was an amazing father and was present in his children's lives, he just never got the help he needed to get clean. This was why the kids were sent to live with their grandparents, who lived in a small town in Kentucky called Edgewood. Growing up, Paige was defined as outgoing, happy, and very friendly. Paige and her sister Brittany, even though they were 3 years apart, had an amazing relationship. They were more like best friends and did everything together. Paige looked up to Brittany, and for Paige, Brittany was her role model, support, and the only thing in her ever-changing world that seemed to stay the same. According to Donna, her mom, Paige was very athletic. She loved cheerleading and gymnastics, and Donna was very proud of Paige and knew in her heart that she'd make her mark in the world. Now, Paige and Brittany, being pretty much inseparable, ended up going to a lot of parties with their friends together. Now, parties come with a lot of boys' attention, and the undeniable spike of teenage hormones. With this in mind, not long after one of these parties, 15-year-old Paige found out that she was pregnant. Now, what was so surprising was that Paige's sister and best friend Brittany, who was 18 at the time, was also pregnant at this point. It was such a surprising moment for both sisters, and Donna and Paige's grandparents were ready to step up and help the 2 young girls, doing their best to make the most of such an unexpected situation. 9 months later, Paige gave birth to a healthy baby girl that she named Mackenzie. Being a teenage mom, Paige admittedly had no idea what she was doing. So she did her best to give her newborn her undivided attention, and she even decided to drop out of school to do so, as there was no one else available to help take care of the young girl, considering her mom was working long hours every day, and her father was proven to be unreliable due to his addiction. Paige, who was 17 at the time, was a single mom, but still very much a teenager. She still did her best to find ways to have fun on the side. Besides, she didn't have school or other activities to keep her busy. And whenever she wanted to go out and meet some friends, she'd have her grandparents babysit Mackenzie for that time. It was a perfect arrangement, and things were going pretty well for Paige in this regard. But one day, everything fell to pieces when Paige disappeared and never came back home. It was September 22nd of 2010, a seemingly normal Wednesday. But we all know by now that while these uneventful days often start normally, they can end up altering the course of our futures very quickly and unexpectedly. Paige had plans to go to a party later in the day, It was a party of a mutual friend that both Paige and Brittany knew, and they were familiar with basically all the people that were going to be there. Paige even asked Brittany if she wanted to come with her, but Brittany had already made plans with her boyfriend at that time, so Paige decided to go without her. Mackenzie was going to be with Donna and the grandparents, so Paige started getting ready for the evening. And before leaving for the party, she promised to meet up with Brittany later at the house, and then she walked out the door to be picked up by a friend. But sadly, she would never return. Now, Paige had a pay-as-you-go cell phone at the time, but she'd run out of minutes. So she decided to leave her phone at home altogether, and if she wanted to contact anyone, then she could just use someone else's phone at the party. Now, hearing this in 2025, it might sound like you're leaving your house without an arm, but this was 2010, and things were pretty different back then. People were not as glued to their phones as they are now, but that also meant that it was harder to make contact with others. Well, hours passed by, and it was late at night, but Paige never returned home. Initially, this wasn't alarming for Brittany because she thought that maybe Paige lost track of time and that they just rescheduled their plans. But as dawn broke and there was still no word from Paige, that was when everyone started to worry. Donna dropped all of her plans and errands when she learned that Paige hadn't showed up since last night. Thus, on September 23rd, 17-year-old Paige was reported missing. Initially, the police officers were trying to calm the terrified Johnson family down. They believed that Paige was probably still out there and she was just not ready to come home yet. They even suggested that maybe Paige had voluntarily run away from home. But this was totally unlike Paige. She had a daughter, and she didn't give any hint about running away from her responsibilities. Yes, Paige was a bit of a wild child, but she wouldn't abandon her infant like that. She was responsible and knew how to be safe, and this was a familiar party. It's not like Paige went out of town to meet someone she'd never seen before. But the investigators were of no help, at least in the beginning. So the Johnson family had no choice but to search for Paige themselves. They printed out flyers, went door to door, and even reached out to Paige's friends to see if anyone knew where she was. But that was when something clicked in their minds. Donna and Brittany both knew that the last person with Paige was the friend who came to pick her up. That friend was 22-year-old Jacob Bumpus. He was much older than both Brittany and Paige, and they'd met several times at parties. Now, Donna had only ever seen pictures of Jacob before, but she did know that he was previously convicted of robbery, so that was enough of a reason for her to dislike the guy. She thought that it was unsettling for a grown man like Jacob to be hanging around with teenagers, and she was not wrong. Still, Donna had to try, and she got in touch with Jacob to ask him about Paige. According to Donna, Jacob was quite cooperative, and he appeared genuinely worried for Paige. He told Donna that he picked Paige up at the house, and then the two went to the party. And afterward, Paige and Jacob went to his house where they proceeded to drink for a bit before he dropped Paige off in a nearby town called Covington, on the corner of East 15th and Scott Street. Now, this was immediately weird for Donna to hear. First, the place was very remote, and it looked like a pretty dark and creepy place for a man to drop a lone 17-year-old girl off. Also, Donna knew that Paige was afraid of the dark, so she definitely wouldn't have asked Jacob to drop her off at a place like that. Things just weren't adding up. Around the same time, Brittany logged into Facebook, and she was surprised to find a message. Now, Facebook in 2010 was way different from what it is now. You had to physically log into Facebook to see all of your notifications, including the messages you'd received, whereas now you get alerted by notifications or the Messenger app. But anyway, Brittany opened the message and was knocked off her feet when she saw a message that was from none other than her now missing sister, Paige. The message read, "Call me now. I need to talk to you ASAP." If you remember, Paige didn't have her phone on her. So was this her way of reaching out to Brittany for help? And was she in trouble when she sent this message? There was just so much going on through Brittany's mind, and I'm sure in some way guilt must have been eating at her on the inside. Initially, Brittany thought that Paige was reaching out to rant about her boyfriend at the time. Brittany thought that Paige had found out about getting cheated on and she was upset. But after her disappearance, Brittany and Donna contacted the detectives again, and they finally took a report on the incident. This was when Donna and Brittany also told the investigators about the talk that they had with Jacob. And it was safe to say that the police were also starting to grow suspicious of this friend of Paige's. Jacob was immediately brought in for questioning, and he pretty much told the investigators the same story. But this was the police, and they did some more mandatory digging of their own. And what they found was not in line with Jacob's story at all. See, Jacob's phone location showed that he was not in the Covington area around the time that he claimed to have dropped Paige off. His phone pinged 30 miles east in Claremont County, near East Fork State Park. When the detectives confronted Jacob with this information, that was when his story slightly shifted. Jacob said that he was out fishing in Claremont County, which was why his phone pinged in that area. Again, the investigators were not convinced. I mean, who goes fishing in the middle of the night? Some people do, sure, but this just didn't make any sense in this particular scenario. The police knew that Jacob was hiding something, but since they didn't have enough evidence, Jacob was free to walk out of the station. Meanwhile, investigators searched large areas east of Cincinnati. They also focused their attention on the area where Jacob's phone had pinged. They went on foot and spread out to scan the area, but nothing was found. But the search for Paige was enormous. Hundreds of locals were on foot and horseback, and the search lasted for weeks. Unfortunately, there was no sign of Paige or any foul play that could point the finger at Jacob. Eventually, the investigators were able to get a search warrant for Jacob's house and for his car. When they searched the car, though, they recovered hair fibers and small red spots inside of it. This, to the police, was enough to keep Jacob on their radar as a person of interest, but not enough to name him as the main suspect. As the investigators and search were underway, Jacob's behavior also changed completely. He was no longer the cooperative friend who wanted to find Paige anymore. He immediately lawyered up and stopped talking to the police altogether. At one point, Jacob was also arrested for violating his probation since he gave Paige alcohol, who, mind you, was a minor. Now, if for some reason Jacob wasn't giving you the creeps already, the fact that he was on parole when he went to that party with a bunch of teenagers, that's unsettling. Almost a year into searching for Paige, her 18th birthday rolled around, but still, there was just no answer. Nobody knew where Paige was, and it was a terrifying and very unsettling time for the Johnson family. Donna was certain that Jacob had done something to her daughter, and even though she didn't want to think about her daughter in the past tense, with time passing and no answers coming to appease them, it was getting harder and harder. There were also many leads in the case. A lot of calls came in about Paige's whereabouts. Each tip was getting darker and darker. Some knew where the detectives could find Paige's body. Some knew about the person who took Paige's life, and some were adamant that they helped bury Paige's body. These were pretty serious leads, and the investigators checked every single one of them, using all the resources they had at the time. The search went on for weeks, if not months, but again, nothing came up. Now, as much as it pains me to say this, all of these leads were probably hoaxes. People just trying to get attention, and it's just gross. I mean, can you imagine what Donna and Brittany were going through? They just wanted answers. They wanted to know where Paige was, but all they were getting were false leads that led to one dead end after another. The detectives were still focused on Jacob because he was the only one who was with Paige, whose story didn't make any sense at all. And he also had no alibi to back his claims. But to charge him with whatever happened to Paige, they needed more evidence. Just like that, 10 years passed by. And yes, you heard that right. The police spent 10 years searching for Paige, going through all of the leads and looking for that crucial piece of information that would be the smoking gun in Paige's disappearance. But one day, someone made a discovery, which would prove to be a turning point in the case, because now this missing person case turned into something much worse. It was March 22nd of 2020 when a deer hunter was walking through a wooded area in Claremont County early in the morning. That was when he stumbled across something, and it was a skull. At first glance, the deer hunter thought that maybe it was an animal skull, but when he looked closer, he knew that his eyes were playing tricks on him, and it was a human skull. The place where the skull was found was only 2 miles from East Fork State Park, the same place where the investigators had been looking for Paige for the last 10 years. Immediately, the detectives arrived at the scene, and the skull was taken in for forensic examination. The place was also thoroughly searched for more remains, but it wasn't that easy. The terrain was very uneven. The area was muddy and full of vegetation. Texas EquuSearch also teamed up with the investigators to help find anything that could be used as evidence, but ultimately the skull was the only thing found at the scene. The skull was later identified through dental records, and it tragically did belong to 17-year-old Paige Johnson. Now, since it had been such a long time, there weren't any more remains found, and thanks to the weather and the animals disturbing the body, the cause of death could never be determined. Now, to charge and ultimately convict a perpetrator, the cause of death is crucial to know. The cause of death can ultimately tell the detectives whether the death was accidental, naturally occurring like old age or a disease, or if foul play was involved. It had been a decade since Paige had disappeared, so determining the cause of death using just a single bone wasn't going to happen. But that doesn't mean that there aren't theories out there. We all know by now that Jacob was acting very weirdly. His stories were not straight. His phone pinged in the same location where Paige's skull was ultimately found, and he was the only person who was with Paige that night. There are 3 possible theories as to what could have happened to Paige. One was that Jacob was attracted to Paige, and he made advances towards her at the party. Paige, already being in a relationship at that time, rejected Jacob, and that caused him to get very angry, and he ultimately ended her life and dumped her body in the wooded area. The second theory suggested that Paige overdosed on either alcohol or other illegal substances while with Jacob. Even though Jacob could have been the one egging Paige on to continue consuming more alcohol or drugs, it's unclear whether Jacob intended to kill her or not. Anyway, Paige could have overdosed, and Jacob, out of panic, decided not to take her to the hospital or call emergency services and left her for dead in the wooded area, as he didn't want to make his parole violation worse. This final theory suggests that it's possible that Jacob carried out the crime while under the influence, or with an accomplice. But keep in mind, these are all assumptions and theories, as the only people who really know what went down after that party on September 2nd are Paige and Jacob. Even assuming that Jacob was actually involved, even that much hasn't really been proven. But the investigators were able to trace Jacob's activity too, thanks to the phone's GPS and where it pinged. We know for sure that Jacob and Paige had met on the night of the party, since there were text conversations between the two. Jacob's phone also pinged near Donna's home, proving that he was the one who picked Paige up. Cell phone records further showed that after possibly ending Paige's life, Jacob was in Claremont County at 4 a.m. on September 23rd, where he texted a friend, and afterward he possibly drove from Kentucky to Ohio and dumped her body in the woods off of Mathis Drive. His phone pinged in the same area the night after the party. Jacob was never in Covington, as he claimed during questioning. Also, what stood out to detectives the most was that a week into Paige's disappearance, Jacob changed his phone number, but we have no way of knowing whether or not this was actually related. Ultimately, Jacob was arrested, but he wasn't charged with murder due to a lack of evidence. Instead, he was charged with abusing a corpse and tampering with evidence in the disappearance of Paige. He eventually pleaded not guilty, and somewhat surprisingly, he was released on a bond of $50,000 while the preparations for his trial were underway. Jacob's trial was held very recently in July of 2023. It's so heartbreaking that Paige's family had to wait an additional 3 years to finally take Paige's case to court, as if waiting a decade for answers wasn't long enough. But the prosecution knew that this case wasn't about how Paige passed away, but more so how Jacob had a hand in either dumping or getting rid of her body. The prosecution presented heaps of evidence in the form of phone records, forensic evidence, and arguments that placed Jacob in the wrong. The prosecution argued that Jacob knew what had happened to Paige, but he didn't contact emergency services or investigators just to save his own skin, and he intentionally threw Paige's life aside so that he wouldn't get in trouble with the law. The defense, on the other hand, claimed that all of the evidence the prosecution had against Jacob was circumstantial. The defense argued that Paige was the one living recklessly and dangerously, and anything bad could have happened to her because of her high-risk lifestyle. The defense team literally blamed Paige's disappearance on herself. You can't make this stuff up. Regardless, after 2 days of deliberation, Jacob was found guilty of the charges. The defense wasn't happy with this at all, and they requested a new trial, which was ultimately denied. On September 7th of 2023, Jacob was sentenced to only 3 years in prison. which is sadly the maximum sentence for the charges that he was found guilty for, and he's scheduled for release in 2027. If Jacob did have a hand in Paige's death, then he quite literally just got away with murder. But since there's no evidence, he can't be tried for murder, which is so maddening. The Johnson family went through phases of fear, hope, grief, and finally some peace after trying to solve Paige's case for almost 13 years. When Paige's skull was discovered, Donna's reaction was a mixture of insurmountable grief, but also relief in a weird way. Donna's worst fear after Paige's disappearance was not being able to put her to rest. And Donna further elaborated saying, quote, "I've been wanting to bring my baby home for so long, and now I get to. This is a day that I was worried I would go to my grave without ever getting." It's so incredibly heartbreaking to see Donna suffering like this. Paige was a young girl who had a beautiful new daughter, and she was looking forward to raising her. But now she's gone forever, leaving Mackenzie without a mother, and the Johnson family torn apart. In memory of Paige, every year the Johnson family visits DeVue Park in Covington, where a tree is planted in Paige's memory. It's a way of being close to Paige and trying to heal their extremely heavy and bruised hearts. And a plaque has been placed right next to one of these trees with the words "Still Loved and Missed" etched onto it. Tragically, Paige's dad, Gary, passed away a few years after her disappearance, and he was never able to get the closure that he so desperately needed. Following Gary's passing, Donna and Alice, Paige's cousin, found a picture of Paige and a poem dedicated to his daughter in his wallet. And it's just devastating that a father had to go through this. He lived on hoping he would get answers one day, but that day never came. We'll never know what actually happened to Paige, even if the person behind her passing is behind bars, and it's only a matter of time before he's let out. And this is what makes the case so much more hurtful and unsatisfying. We can only hope that the Johnson family, after more than a decade of hurt, grief, and emptiness, can move on with their lives and remember the good and happy memories of Paige. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple of channel members, including Jessica Noble and Liz Hartel. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I appreciate every single one of you that have made the decision to do that. So if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are available now, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and it just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.